20 raise 50 chickens for $40 a year. The Amish Coop blueprint feed companies hoped you'd never build 50 hens scratching in the half dark. That's the first thing you hear when you step into this coop at 5 in the morning. Not clucking, not squawking, just the steady sound of feet working the ground. The air smells like damp leaves, like a forest floor, not ammonia. Not the sour bite you get from every other hen house you've walked into. And there's something missing in the corner where you'd expect to find it. No feed bin, no metal scoop, no torn open 50-pound bag slumped against the wall, 50 birds, and not a pellet in the building. The man who built this coop, missing half a thumbnail, coat that smells like cedar, told me his feed bill last year came to $37 for all of them. And the reason has less to do with what he feeds them than with the building they're standing in. Before I show you how this works, and I will show you every part of it, I want to ask you something honest. If you keep birds, or you've been thinking about it, and the cost of feed has been sitting in the back of your mind like a rock in your boot, you're not alone. That's most of us. If this is the kind of plain, quiet knowledge that matters to you, stick around. And if you want more of it when it comes, subscribing is the simplest way to make sure it finds you. If you're feeding 50 laying hens on bagged feed right now, you already know what the number looks like. A 50-pound bag of layer pellets runs about $18 to $22, depending on where you live and which store still has it. 50 birds go through that bag in roughly 10 days, sometimes less. That's 2 bags a month if you're lucky, 3 if you're honest. Run that math across 12 months and you're somewhere north of $2,000 a year, just on feed, not bedding, not supplements, not the water that cracked in January, just the pellets, $2,000 for eggs. And here's the part that should bother you more than the number itself. That cost has nearly doubled in the last 4 years. Feed prices started climbing hard around 2021. The bags got more expensive. Then quietly, some of them got smaller. What used to be 50 pounds became 40, then 35. The price and the tag stayed close to the same. The weight didn't. If you noticed, nobody at the feed store explained it to you. If you didn't notice, that was the idea. Now, I'm not Amish. I want to be clear about that. But I've spent time watching how plain families in Lancaster County and Holmes County keep their flocks, and what I saw didn't match anything the feed store ever told me. These families are keeping 40, 50, sometimes 80 birds on properties that aren't large. And their annual out-of-pocket for purchased feed, the actual dollars that leave the farm, comes in under 100. In some cases, well under. The man I mentioned with the cedar coat and the missing thumbnail told me his number was $37 last year. I believe him. Not because it sounds right, but because I walked through his setup and saw how every piece connects. Here's what surprised me most. I expected the secret to be the feed. Some miracle grain, some trick with scraps, and yes, the way they feed is different. We'll get deep into that. But the real lever, the thing that makes all the other pieces possible, is the coop itself, the building, its shape, its floor, the way it's oriented to the land. It's not a chicken house in the way most of us think about a chicken house. It is a system. The coop and the feeding method are not two separate decisions. They are one thing. Pull them apart and the math falls apart with them. That idea that the coop is part of the feed system is not something you'll find printed on the back of a feed bag. It's not something the Agricultural Extension Office leads with. And it's certainly not something the companies selling you $18 sacks of pellets have any reason to explain. Because once you understand how this works, you don't need those sacks anymore. At least not the way you've been using them. The industry that supplies backyard poultry feed is built on a simple assumption. That your birds cannot eat without the bag. That assumption is the foundation, and it's wrong. Commercial chicken feed, in the pelleted form most of us buy it, is a product of the mid-20th century. It was developed for confinement operations, buildings with no windows, no outdoor access, thousands of birds packed wing to wing under artificial light. In that world, the pellet makes sense. It has to. Those birds have nothing else. No ground to scratch, no bugs to chase, no kitchen scraps, no pasture, no rotting log full of grubs. The pellet is their entire existence. But your 50 birds in your backyard, they are not living in a confinement building. They have ground, they have sky. They have everything those factory birds don't. So why are you feeding them the same way? Before the 1940s, most farm families in America fed their chickens the way families had fed them for centuries. Kitchen scraps went to the birds, overripe fruit, stale bread, vegetable peelings, whatever the family didn't finish, the flock did. Beyond that, the birds foraged. They ate insects, worms, grass seed, clover, small frogs, the occasional mouse. They scratched through compost. They followed cattle through pasture and picked through the manure for larvae. The grain they received, if any, was whatever surplus the farm produced. Corn, wheat, barley, not purchased, grown. The entire system ran on what the land and the household already produced. Nobody was driving to a store to buy a bag. That older way didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because something more profitable replaced it. The post-war surplus of cheap grain, the consolidation of feed mills, the rise of the farm supply franchise, all of it pushed a single message. Your birds need a scientifically formulated ration, and only we can provide it. For a factory farm, that's true. For your backyard, it's a sales pitch, and it's a sales pitch that has cost the average small flock keeper hundreds of dollars a year for decades. The coop I walked through that morning, the one that smelled like leaves instead of ammonia, was built by a man who never believed that pitch. And the way he built it tells you everything about why. The thing I keep coming back to is something he said while we stood in the doorway, watching those 50 birds work the ground in the gray light. He said it the way you'd say something obvious, something that didn't need explaining. Feed was never supposed to come in a bag. He wasn't making a point, he was just describing the world as he understood it. And standing in that coop, with no pellet dust in the air and no feed bill on the wall, it was hard to argue with him. What he built instead, the shape of the building, the floor underneath it, and the 4 quiet systems that replace the bag, that's what the rest of this is about. Most chicken coops in America are built to do one thing: keep the birds inside. 4 walls, a roof, a door, some roost bars, a nest box or two. Maybe a window if the builder was feeling generous. The floor is plywood, or concrete or packed dirt that turns to mud in March and concrete in July. The manure piles up, the smell gets worse. Every 2 weeks, somebody goes in with a shovel and a wheelbarrow and scrapes the whole mess out. It takes an hour, it smells like a punishment, and the next morning it starts building up again. That is how most people understand a chicken coop. A box you clean. And every time you clean it, you're throwing away money because that manure had something to offer, and you just hauled it to a pile behind the barn where nobody uses it. The coop I walked through doesn't work that way. The floor is bare earth. Not poured concrete, not plywood sheeting, just ground. And on top of that ground sits about 10 inches of dry material. Oak leaves mostly, mixed with wood shavings, some shredded cardboard. It's loose, it's dry, it smells like the floor of a hardwood forest in October. The birds scratch through it all day long. They turn it, they mix it. And when they drop manure into it, which 50 birds do constantly, that manure doesn't sit on top and rot. It gets worked down into the carbon layer by the birds themselves. The scratching pulls oxygen into the mix, and the whole mass begins to decompose, slowly, quietly, the way a forest floor breaks down a fallen leaf. This is called the deep litter method, and it is not new. Farmers and homesteaders have used it for generations. The principle is simple enough that a child could understand it. High carbon material on the bottom, nitrogen-rich manure from the birds on top, and the constant turning action of the flock to keep air moving through the pile. What you get is a living compost system inside the coop. The microbes that drive decomposition, billions of them in every handful, consume the nitrogen before it can gas off as ammonia. That's why there's no smell. Joel Salatin, who has probably done more to teach small-scale livestock management than anyone alive, puts it plainly. If you smell manure around any livestock operation, you're smelling mismanagement, not the animal, the management. Now here's where it gets interesting for your feed bill. That deep litter isn't just managing waste. It's producing food. As the microbial population grows inside that decomposing layer, it generates compounds the birds actually need. Experienced poultry keepers and some agricultural research suggest that active deep litter produces B vitamins, vitamin K, and other nutrients through microbial metabolism. Harvey Ussery, who wrote what many consider the best book on small flock poultry keeping, The Small-Scale Poultry Flock, describes deep litter as a supplemental feed source. The chickens eat the microorganisms. They eat the small insects that colonize the litter. They scratch for tiny larvae and decomposing matter the way their ancestors scratched through the jungle floor for millennia. The coop is feeding them, not all of their diet, but a meaningful part of it. And it costs you nothing beyond the leaves you raked last fall. The earth floor matters more than most people realize. A dirt floor wicks just enough moisture up from the ground to keep the microbial process alive without making the litter damp. It self-regulates in a way that concrete and plywood cannot. Too dry and the microbes slow down. Too wet and you get mold, specifically a mold called aspergillus, which can damage the lungs of birds and humans alike. And earth floor threads that needle naturally in most climates for most of the year. The one exception, and this is worth knowing, is during unusually heavy, prolonged rain. If your water table rises and soaks the base of the litter from below, you can get problems. The fix is to add extra dry material, more leaves, more shavings, and let the birds work it through. But in a well-drained location, an earth floor is the simplest, cheapest, and most effective foundation you can use. There's a structural detail that matters if you're building new. That bioactive litter, the living compost your birds are working, will slowly degrade any wood it sits against. Wall studs, sill plates, corner posts. Over years, the decomposition process eats into the structure. The old-timers solved this with a concrete block perimeter foundation. About 12 inches high, the litter sits inside that masonry basin. All the wood framing starts above it. If you've already got a coop and the wood is touching the litter, a sheet of corrugated metal or fiberglass along the inside base does the same job. It's a $15 fix that adds a decade to your building. And it's the kind of thing nobody tells you until the corner post goes soft and you're rebuilding in November. The shape of the coop matters too, and this is where the Amish design starts to separate from the standard backyard box. Most coops are roughly square, short and wide. Birds cluster in the middle, near the feeder, and the corners go dead. The coop I walked through was narrow and long, maybe 8 feet wide and close to 30 feet deep. The roost bars ran along one wall. The nest boxes sat at the far end, and the rear wall had a small pop door that opened directly onto a fenced forage strip. That shape does something important. It pushes the birds outward, toward the door, toward the ground outside. Instead of circling a feeder in the center of a square room, the flock moves through the building like water through a channel, out onto the land where the real food is. The building is not designed to contain them. It is designed to move them. And that rear door, the one that opens onto the forage strip, is the hinge that connects the coop to the rest of the feed system. Everything inside the building handles bedding, composting, and a portion of the nutrition through deep litter. Everything outside handles the bulk of the diet through what I think of as 4 buckets. 4 separate, low-cost feed sources that together replace 80% or more of what that $18 bag used to provide. The coop makes those 4 buckets possible. Without the coop's design pushing birds onto the land, the buckets don't work. Without the buckets filling the nutritional gap, the coop is just a nice-smelling barn. They're one system. And the system is what drops the number from $2,000 to $40,000. So let me walk you through each bucket, one at a time, starting with the one that's already sitting on your kitchen counter. The first bucket is the one your grandmother already used, whether she called it a system or not. The kitchen bucket, vegetable peelings, stale bread heels, leftover rice that sat in the pot too long, overripe tomatoes from the windowsill, melon rinds, apple cores, the plate scrapings from last night's supper that would otherwise go into the trash. A family of 4 generates a surprising volume of this material every week, and for centuries it was the primary feed source for backyard flocks across the world. From Appalachia to Guatemala to the English countryside, the chicken ate what the family didn't, not as a supplement, as the foundation. Common sense applies here. You're not feeding them candy wrappers or moldy bread. But the range of what a chicken will eat and thrive on is far wider than any feed bag label would suggest. The second bucket is the one that surprised me most, because the math on it is almost hard to believe. Fermented grain. You buy whole barley or whole wheat in bulk. A 50-pound sack runs roughly $15 to $20 at most feed stores or grain elevators, but you don't feed it dry. You soak it in a 5-gallon bucket of water for 3 days. You stir it twice a day. By the 3rd morning, the grain has swelled to nearly double its volume. Beneficial bacteria have begun multiplying in the liquid. The texture is soft. The smell is sour and yeasty, like a mild sourdough. What you've done is increase the digestibility of that grain dramatically. The birds fill their crops faster. They eat less by weight. Many homesteaders who've adopted this method report cutting their pellet usage by half or more. One keeper I read about documented dropping her annual pellet bill by over 50% with fermented barley alone. That single bucket changes the economics of everything. The third bucket isn't a bucket at all. It's the ground, pasture rotation. If you have even a quarter acre of land, and many people reading this have more, you can divide it into 5 to 7 small sections using portable electric poultry netting and rotate your flock through them on a 6 to 12 day cycle. The birds eat grass, clover seed heads, crickets, beetles, earthworms, and whatever else moves through the soil. The pasture rests and regrows behind them. Research connected to Clemson University through a permaculture-minded farmer named Sean Jadernitsek documented a 30% reduction in purchased feed costs. Using this kind of rotational system alone, that's 30% gone before you've touched the kitchen scraps or the fermented grain. And the birds aren't just eating. They're fertilizing the ground as they go. Every paddock they'll leave behind is richer than the one they entered. The fourth bucket is the one that sounds strange until you think about it for 10 seconds. Insects, protein that grows itself. A simple compost pile, fed with garden waste and household scraps, will attract black soldier fly larvae in warm months. Those larvae are among the highest protein feeds available to poultry, and they cost nothing. They come to you. Some keepers build small dedicated bins for this purpose. Others just let the compost pile do what compost piles do and turn the birds loose on it once a week. Either way, you're replacing the most expensive component of commercial feed, the protein fraction, with something the land produces for free. Use common sense with compost hygiene and check whether your area has any local rules about food waste composting. But the principle is as old as chickens themselves. Birds scratch through rot. They always have. Now here's where I want to be honest with you about the number in the title, $40 a year. On the setup I walked through, with serious foraging acreage, a family producing ample kitchen scraps, fermented barley in rotation, and deep litter doing its work inside, the actual purchased feed bill came in under $50 for the year. That was the cost of a couple bags of whole grain bought in the dead of winter when the ground was frozen and the bugs were gone. Your number will be different. Your winter is longer or shorter, your land is bigger or smaller, your family produces more scraps or fewer. Many keepers who adopt this full system report landing somewhere between $40 and $80 a year in purchased feed. The direction is the same even if the exact number shifts. You are not eliminating the bag entirely. You are shrinking it from the center of the system to the edge. One thing I need to say plainly, because it would be dishonest not to. This system works best with heritage breeds. Birds like Baird Rocks, Rhode Island Reds, Australorps, Dominiques, breeds that were developed over generations to forage, to scratch, to find their own food on open ground. If your flock is made up entirely of modern production hybrids, the kind bred for confinement houses and maximum egg output, they may not forage as aggressively. Many of them have had that instinct bred down over decades. That's not a failure on your part. That's biology. They'll still benefit from deep litter and fermented grain and kitchen scraps, but the pasture component won't carry as much of the load. If you're starting a new flock with this system in mind, choose your breeds for the life you're asking them to live. I'd be curious about something. If you keep chickens right now, what are you feeding them besides what comes out of a bag? Most people are already doing some version of one of these buckets without thinking of it as a system. Maybe it's the kitchen scraps. Maybe it's turning them out on the lawn. Maybe your grandmother did something with soaked grain that you half remember. Whatever it is, I'd like to hear it. Drop it in the comments below. I read every one of them, and the best ideas I find there have a way of showing up in future work on this channel. Here's what I want to leave you with tonight. Nobody at the feed company is evil. They are selling a product. But that product was designed for a factory, for a building with no windows, no ground, and no alternative. Every dollar you spend on it is a quiet way of saying you can't do what your great-grandmother did without their help. She kept a flock through the Depression on kitchen scraps, a garden, and a patch of dirt. She didn't have a system, she just had sense. And the birds laid every morning. What you've seen today isn't a trick. It isn't a hack, it's the old way, rebuilt for your land and your life. The Coop handles the bedding and part of the nutrition. The 4 buckets handle the rest. Together, they are one system, and pulling any piece out collapses the math. But together, the number is yours to set, not theirs. If that's the kind of quiet, do it yourself thinking that sits right left with you, the kind that doesn't come with a barcode or a monthly subscription. This channel is where we talk about it. Subscribe so the next one finds you. Because next week, I'm going to show you the one thing inside a Coop that keeps water liquid through January without a single watt of electricity. It's smaller than your fist. It costs about $2. And it's been sitting in Amish barns for longer than any of us have been alive.